Okay. Welcome, everybody, to this evening's program, which is called Retirement is a Long Vacation. We are doing workshops this week with America Saves Week campaign, and in Steuben County, we are calling it Steuben Saves. So we know that that's a big effort for people, is to be able to save money and to be on top of their financial security. And, you know, nobody has a crystal ball. And so having savings put in place for those emergencies, for goals, retirement, which we're going to talk about tonight, and those other important aspects of our finances. So I'm Nancy Riegelsberger, the financial educator for Cornell Cooperative Extension out of Steuben County, and we thank you for joining us this evening. I will watch the chat box for Amy. So if you do have questions and would like to address something as she's going along, please put it in the chat. Or if you do want to unmute, we will, I'm sure she will allow your questions. So our presenter tonight, and we're very grateful and always so proud and privileged to be able to collaborate with Amy Irvine, who is part of the Rooted Planning Group out of Corning. And I think she has offices in other locations like sunny Florida as well. So thank you, Amy, for joining us from sunny Florida tonight to be able to present to us.
Well, thank you for having me. And we have Fort Collins, Colorado, Valent, Oklahoma, and then, Corning, and I happen to be in Parrish, Florida. So thank you for letting me participate in the evening. I get to talk about a topic that I'm always very excited to talk about, which is planning for goals, in particular, planning for retirement. If you think about it, retirement is the longest vacation you'll ever go on. And so when you think about planning it, you need a roadmap. Any vacation, you sort of need a roadmap. Even if it's flying in a plane, you need a roadmap, right? So I'm going to dig in with having you just take a moment, think for just a moment. What does life look like when you are on vacation? I know for me personally, things just sort of slow down a little bit. I have the chance to decompress, de-stress, really enjoy the things that I'm most passionate about. What kind of things do you like to do when you're on vacation? Well, my number one thing is watching sunsets, because a lot of the time, by the time the sun sets, especially in the summer, I'm half asleep. So I love to actually sit by and watch a sunset when I'm on vacation. Some people like to sit by a lake when they're on vacation. Others like to travel when they're on vacation, or they like to spend their time doing particular activities. All of these are wonderful, and completely up to you. That's the joy of vacation, right? Well, now put in context of how much time you usually spend in vacation, which is maybe, if we're lucky, 2 weeks. And think about it for being 20 or 30 or sometimes even 40 years in length. Planning the vacation, however, is another story. Planning a vacation isn't something you just happens, and neither does retirement. It really takes time and energy. So if you think about it, what goes into planning a vacation? It's really the same that you put into planning for retirement. Planning for vacation includes things like, well, what does it look like? What will you need? What does the roadmap look like? What's the cost? What kind of packing do we need to do? Quote unquote packing. What sort of forecasting should we take into consideration? And then what makes you feel comfortable and really enjoy vacation? And that last one is particularly important because a lot of people, if they've been earning all their lives, the thought of going from earning a paycheck every single week to having to draw down on their portfolio or other assets is pretty scary. So what does retirement look like for you? Just going to go back one. What does retirement look like for you? That's an important question that you really need to think through. Retirement might be something that you're working part-time. It might be something that you're babysitting part-time. It might be you're part of clubs. It might be that you're part of a knitting association, or that you spend time with your children, or like I said, you travel, or you're just actively involved. What is your vision? And why it's important to think about what your vision is because we can't create the roadmap if we don't know what it really looks like. It's so important to price out the options that you have within your vision of retirement, or vacation as we're calling it. So let's dig just a little bit deeper on this. When we think about unpacking for vacation, right? What is the different, think about packing for vacation, I should say. What are the different options that we would have when we're packing for vacation? The idea of a retirement suitcase, as you would say. We want to define both what the minimum income is that you need, right? What would you need to feel secure in retirement? The desired lifestyle you have before you can say freedom from the working life that you've had. Because you might want to actually work after you retire, but maybe it's in a dream job that you've always thought that you wanted to do, or a passion job, as I would say. It's super important to think about what life looks like when you think about the security for you. What keeps you up at night, or what would keep you up at night if you didn't have a certain amount of income? The minimum desired income creates two sides of the box, basically. So it's minimum and then desired amount of income, right? So income is for your lifestyle that you want to lead, and then minimum income is about how much you would receive to make you feel secure. Now, where does income come from in retirement? It could be pension, although many of those are going away. It could be personal savings. It could be Social Security. It could be retirement savings. You have to figure out what are all the different sources. And we're going to dig into that just a little bit more. But you can see minimum age is on there and maximum age is also on there. That's the other side of the box. If you know the minimum lifestyle you want to have and your health turns bad, well, then you could actually say that that's sort of the minimum age that you'll stop working in a way. The maximum age is where you'll say, even if I don't have more than my minimum security income, I just cannot work past that. I'm willing to plan to spend significantly less and adjust my lifestyle if I have to do it at that point in time. This gives us really critical information and factors in defining your retirement solutions. Having those resources available to you is what helps us determine what those goals are. And certainly by defining these variables, we can work with ranges. So when people sit down to work with us and we say, well, what's your desired retirement age? A lot of people will say tomorrow. But then in reality, we start moving that age around a little bit and we start playing with the numbers to see when would be the best age. So there's a mix in the middle somewhere there. The thing that we don't know is how long you're going to live in retirement. So planning for a very long period of time based on maybe your family history and or your own personal history is also something that we need to take into consideration. By defining these variables, as I said, we can work with ranges and define how big the bucket needs to be. So what does the bucket need to look like that will provide you with the minimum income and create security? I guess we're going to call this the security bucket. And as we get further into this presentation, we'll see why I call it the bucket. We can calculate how much is going to be needed and based on the lifestyle that you want to choose. And knowing these factors will let you make informed decisions, such as after making sure you have savings enough for your security bucket. So basically you don't have to go back to work if you don't want to in retirement. Now, ways that you can save. There's 403Bs, there's 401Ks. The maximum amount that you can contribute to either of those is $19,500 plus $6,000 if you're over the age of 50. These components have both traditional 401k contributions and what's called Roth 401k or 403b contributions. Not every company has that second component, so you have to check with your employer. Then there's what's called 457 plans, and they have the same limits as a 401k, but often have different distribution options. Often with 457 plans, you can actually take the money after age 50 instead of the traditional age 55 from 401ks. And by the way, that age 55 from 401ks is only if you retire after 55. If you retire or leave the company before 55, it's the traditional 59 and a half. IRAs allow you to put $6,000 in plus $1,000 if you're over 50, and Roth IRAs allow the same, but they are combined together. So you can't put 12,000, 6 in a traditional and 6 in a Roth. It's 6 aggregately. And then there's things called a brokerage account, which allows you to put an unlimited amount in, and you pay tax as you go. So any interest that's earned on that brokerage account, you would pay tax in the year that it's earned, or any capital gain, you would pay tax on the year that it's earned. Those are ways that you can save for your longest vacation. Beyond the savings, there's growth. Now, we're not going to get into the whole investment concept when we're talking about this particular class, but certainly investing is a piece of it. When you're thinking about investing, you have to know 3 key risks. Number one, you need to know your own personal risk capacity. When we talk about risk capacity, we talk about what would make you not sleep at night. If the market is in a correcting mode, what portion or what percentage or what dollar amount would your account be unrealized that would make you not sleep about? What's your risk capacity? That's the gut check. If you've ever worked with a financial planner, they ask you about risk tolerance. We call it risk capacity. What is your own ability to handle risk that's going on a day-to-day basis? Then there is what's called risk need. Risk need says you have to take this much risk in your portfolio and in the design of your portfolio in order to actually make your savings grow to a certain amount. It could be 4%, it could be 5%, but when you're running those calculations, of course, the higher the risk that you take, the higher the rate of return expected, but not always guaranteed. And so how much risk overall do you need to take into your portfolio? That's a really important question to ask when you're doing those projections. And then the final question is, who is the risk for? So I've called it risk for whom. Sometimes if the portfolio is significant enough, then the risk is for your beneficiaries. And so we're not actually planning for your life expectancy, we're planning beyond your life expectancy, in which case risk capacity and risk need may be different. When we talk about finding what your risk is and what your ability and need and for whom the risk is, we take that to the next level of what's called asset allocation. Now, asset allocation says I've got to have a certain amount in bonds and a certain amount in stocks in order to give me that rate of return that my risk needs said, right? So again, not to get into too much of it, but it might be a 50-50 portfolio or a 40% equity, 60% bond portfolio. If you're young, it's probably more likely 100% equities or 99% equities and only a small percent in bonds. One thing that many people overlook, though, is the asset type diversification. I want to flip back for just a second to the prior screen. When you see these different positions that are listed here, the 401k, 403b, 457, IRA, Roth IRA, and brokerage account, we like to see people have a third in pre-tax, so that would be these, assuming that the 401k doesn't have the Roth component. So a third in pre-tax, a third in Roth, and then a third in what we call brokerage or taxable accounts. Having a third in each of those accounts really allows for you in retirement to have choices where you pull money from, and therefore not have to spend as much potentially on taxes. So strategies, especially when we start working with young individuals, we want them to build those buckets right off the bat in that third category. I know we've all been told, save in your 401k plan, defer it later when you're going to be in a lower tax bracket, but there's falsity to that anymore. Most people, when they retire, have a certain aspect of lifestyle that they want to maintain. And if all of their money is in pre-tax, now they're pulling money out when they're potentially in a higher tax bracket, because think about it, you're in your usually highest earning tax years just before you retire. So asset type of diversification is just as important as asset allocation, which talks about not having all your eggs in one basket per se, not having one stock or one bond, but having a diverse portfolio. So diversification, when you think of it, needs to be in two categories. One is asset allocation diversification, and one is asset type diversification. So where's the start of your roadmap? I don't know the ages of the people that are attending the class tonight, but if you are in your 20s or early 30s, or you know somebody in your 20s or early 30s, then you should start saving 10% of your income in emergency funds right now. You need to get that emergency fund developed. Whoops. You need to get that emergency fund developed so that you don't get sidetracked later. So start saving 10% of your income now and build the emergency fund. Contribute to qualified plans and make sure you get the employer match. Always, always, always. And then I know it's not the favorite thing in the world to do, but learn to live within a budget. You don't have to track every single week, but we recommend that at least once a month, you sort of check in with your spending. Are you living below your means? Are you saving? Are you contributing? We actually do reverse budgeting with a lot of our clients. We automate their retirement plan savings. We automate their travel savings. We automate their cash cushion, which is also called the emergency fund savings. And then we tell them to live off the rest of it. Makes it super easy. They're doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing with their savings so they can live off the rest of it. And a lot of them within their 20s or 30s are also saving for things like a house and, maybe a wedding and those kinds of things. So they've got a lot of different money going in a lot of different areas. We want to make sure they're contributing to their qualified plan and getting their employer match. And then if at all possible, we love to see them contributing into the pre-tax portion, the after-tax portion, Roth portion of their 401k or a Roth IRA, because this is probably the least amount of income they'll pay taxes on in their working career. So they're probably in the lowest tax bracket. The roadblocks that we often find for people in their 20s and 30s are things like disability, potentially death of a loved one, liability, risk associated with their overall life, and job loss. 20s and early 30s, people do change jobs or have job loss happen to them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's competing goals to pay off student loans, buying a house, saving for retirement. That's why budgeting for people in their 20s and 30s is so critical, to take a step back and look at where your resources can go. Now, a lot of people will say, I have limited resources and it's only going to go so far. But with today's side hustle, gig economy, we actually work with a lot of people in their 20s and 30s to earn more money on the side to help pay off some of the other debt that they might have, or to save for some of their goals. When you get to your mid-career, this is where we really want you to spend time to increase your financial knowledge, make sure your debt is in management, really focus on growing that nest egg, fund pre-retirement goals, learn to budget and to plan for unexpected expenses if you haven't already done that. Now, the roadblocks that we often see, this is playing with it. It's doing its own thing. I don't know what's going on here. The roadblocks that we often see are very much like people in their 20s and 30s: disability, death, liability, debt, job loss. These folks might already have the home that they wanted to purchase, but they might want to upsize because the kids are getting bigger. They might need to plan for college, or they might need to, save a bit more. It's weird, this thing has a mind of its own. Then the next thing that you want to look at is within the 10 to 15 years before retirement. So 10 to 15 years before retirement, remember when I asked you what retirement looked like? That's the period of time that we really want to sit down and say, what is your dream? Envision your retirement dream. Tell me what it looks like. The question that I often ask people, and I'd have you ask yourself, is if money wasn't a barrier, what would you change in your life? Would you travel more? Would you spend more time with your kids? Would you spend more time with your parents? Would you spend more time volunteering? Envision that as a retirement dream. What does that look like? This is a perfect opportunity within 10 to 15 years before retirement also to create a current and a retirement budget. Now, I know a lot can change when you're that far out from retirement, but if you start practicing this early, it's actually going to benefit you hugely. You want to make sure the strategies are in place to review debt in retirement too. People always say you should have no debt when you go into retirement, but we've actually been running scenarios recently where people do have a mortgage going into retirement because maybe they are relocating, they sell their existing home, they take 20%, 20 or take a portion of that, pay 20% down on their, or 25% down on their new home, and they invest the rest. It actually makes their retirement plan work out better because they're not locking up one of their largest assets in a non-income producing asset. They're able to pay a very low interest rate right now, extremely low interest rate right now, and to turn around and invest it over time, very likely get a higher interest rate than what they're paying on that mortgage. So the scenarios that we're running right now actually show that it's not a bad thing if you have some sort of mortgage or you're utilizing that illiquid asset of your home. The other thing that you need to make sure that you're focused on when you're 10 to 15 years before retirement is taking care of your health. As Nancy always says, it is your first wealth. But seriously, being proactive, being aware of what's going on, making sure you do your healthy checks. Healthcare costs are one of the most detrimental to any retirement plan that we've ever run. If you have a lot of health issues, that means that your retirement nest egg has to be so much larger. And start tracking that Social Security and invest in your investment results. You can log into get your Social Security statement online. It's quite a difficult system to get into, and I mean that in a favorable way so that there isn't identity theft. But you can get a copy of your statement and track that the income that you received was the income that was reported. We have found errors over time when we've been looking at tracking Social Security statements, so it is important to look at those. Make sure you stay on top of reviewing insurance, long-term care, life, and disability. In these critical years before retirement, if any of those things were to happen, it really does put a huge roadblock into the overall retirement plan. And I mentioned before, make sure that you have some funds that are specifically set aside for medical expenses in retirement, or that you have a plan as to how you're going to cover those. Start dreaming about those encore careers that you might love. It might not generate a whole heck of a lot of money in your overall portfolio or in your overall income stream, but if you're doing something that you absolutely love and you're earning a little money off from it, that's an ideal situation for you. Retirement doesn't have to mean that you stop working. It just means that you stop working at the job that you are currently in. And encore careers are quite common. One of our colleagues in the profession, Dr. O'Neill, she actually has started a whole second career, and I'm going to actually reference her book in just a few seconds. She retired, and then, well, she doesn't even like to say that she retired. She says she left her prior employer after many years there and has now started her encore career. You can do the same thing, and we highly suggest, and I know this sounds like it's me selling something, but it truly is, to get a detailed plan at least once during that period of time. When you get close to your destination, in other words, when you're getting close to retirement, one of the things that we want you to start thinking of when you're within 1 to 3 years is trying to live within your intended retirement lifestyle. That becomes super critical at that point in time. We like to call it practicing retirement. So try living within your intended retirement lifestyle. Review your Social Security and pension benefits and options. Play the what if with the various numbers. Consider housing options. As I mentioned, some people want to change. Some people love being in a community that is very active, that might be 55 plus. Other people want to stay in their home, but you should consider your housing options, not just now, but later in retirement. It's super critical to think about what happens when you need to have some care potentially. Explore options for retirement plans such as a joint pension or annuitization. Even if your employer doesn't have a pension, you may be eligible to have what's called an immediate annuity and create your own pension. Now, I'm not a huge fan of annuities per se, but sometimes when they can give a fixed amount and take care of some of your basic living expenses, they are a good solution that should be explored. Those, as I mentioned, are called immediate annuities, and they can create your own personal pension, and you can consider taking it over your life or joint lives of your significant other. You should also review your investment strategies. If you're 1 to 3 years before retirement, this is time to get really serious about looking at the allocation and doing that risk capacity discussion and risk need discussion. Many times we'll recommend that you use a fee-only or financial planner to help you identify some of those issues. And the reason for that is they're not biased in any way, shape, or form about the advice that they're giving you. They're not getting paid on a product. They're just getting paid for the services that you do. And then, as I mentioned before, this is the time that you could really start exploring some of those encore careers and seriously exploring them, and get used to it, the annual review of a budget, assets, and cash flow. This is going to be really critical for your success in retirement. When we do projections for people and we tell them, your retirement plan looks successful based on this amount of income that you're going to spend each year. If you find that you're significantly over that amount of income or expenses each year, then the plan needs to be readjusted, or you may need to go and find like a part-time job, or determine that you're only going to do that for a few years and then scale back. It's important to look at that. It's probably the most critical time to make sure that even if you're reverse engineering the budget, that you're staying within that spending plan, because money isn't coming in to replace what you're spending. So then once you've arrived to your vacation destination, the countdown year, as I say, this is a great time to think about things like simplifying your financial life, doing automatic deposits, automatic bill payments, consolidating accounts where it makes sense, finalize those health insurance options. Now, one thing that I want to mention is when you finalize those health insurance options, that is for the initial stage of your retirement years. Understand that health insurance is not a set it and forget it option in retirement. You should be looking at that every single year. Insurance plans change. If you're on the exchange, they change deductibles, they change coverage. If you're with an employer, then things can change there. If you're on Medicare, especially the Part D plans or the Medicare Advantage plans can change every single year. They get the option of changing once a year, and you can only change that once a year. So it's really, the health insurance piece of your retirement years is not a set it and forget it option, and something that you shouldn't look at every single year. It really is. You should also consider finalizing some of those long-term care strategies. I'm not saying that you should determine where you want to go in for long-term care. Most people actually want to stay in their home and go to some kind of continuing care, independent living. But I'm saying that you should understand how much of your plan needs to be haircutted, for lack of a better term, for those kinds of expenses. It may look like your portfolio is significant for your living expenses, and that's true. But when we think about when your care expenses, and I'm not talking about long-term care insurance here, I'm talking about what is the care that you want in retirement. I think if COVID taught us anything, most people want to stay out of facility care if at all possible. So how do we pay for that within our home? What are the options? And there's lots of different options. We can take a piece of your portfolio and plop it over an account and say, okay, that money is not to be touched. That's for my caregiving needs when I need it. Or you can do what's called hybrid insurance / long-term care policies, where you take out an insurance policy that happens to have a rider on it, that if you need care, you can implement that rider to pay for some of your care expenses. And then there's also traditional long-term care that you can purchase if you want to supplement the need for caregiving. Those are fairly expensive plans But it's that thought process of what does it look like? And it's not a time, like it's not at a certain age. It's when I have these symptoms or this ailment, or, I'm by myself now at these different stages in my retirement, I'll make those changes. And here's the strategies that I want to implement. It's also very important to talk about withdrawal strategies. I mentioned to you earlier that a third bucket. Determining where to pull the money from in retirement is a part of the whole plan that's probably really critical in saving you a significant amount of income tax, honestly. If you're under the age of 65 and you don't have any kind of employer health insurance, you may need to get insurance through the exchange. So having the opportunity to keep your income at a lower level during those years by pulling from the brokerage, remember I said the brokerage or after-tax account, or some even from the Roth, if you need to, with a little bit from the taxable account, will give you a much higher amount that the insurance offset would provide for you. So there's basically a subsidy that can reduce the cost of the insurance. We recently had a case where we set up the withdrawal strategy for their first 2 years of retirement, which was when they were 63 and 64, where their income was under $30,000, and they were able to get a essential plan in the state of New York, and the monthly fee for that was $25. And it's a really good plan. So making sure your withdrawal strategies are in place are really important. So that you can get these kinds of plans. And sometimes if you can't do it every year, we'll alternate it every other year, take a large withdrawal and then take minimum withdrawals, and then take a large withdrawal and then a minimum withdrawal. That way, every other year, your health insurance costs are lower. You also should be exploring and finalizing any of the employee benefit options and retirement plans that you have available to you. What can you take with you? What can't you take with you? What's convertible, as they call it. What are the options for retirement? What do they give you? Is there health insurance you can take with you? Is there life insurance you can take with you? Can you take withdrawals from the retirement plan? And if you're under age 59 and a half, this is super critical, because remember how I said earlier, if you retire after age 55, then you can take withdrawals from a 401k plan and not have the 10% penalty if you leave the money in the plan. So the money has to remain in the plan between the age of 55 and 59 and a half. So you want to be exploring, can I get to this money if I retire at 55 without having to take an entire lump sum distribution? We often tell our clients that retire at 55 to leave their money in the 401k plan until they're 59 and a half, even if they have other resources, just in case. Because if they roll it over into an IRA, then they've lost out on that early withdrawal penalty exemption. The other thing, as I mentioned, now that you've arrived, is to start your encore career or not. Maybe you don't want an encore career. Maybe you have other interests to determine, like volunteer interests. The good news is you get to try several of them out. You can try out different volunteer interests, and if you don't like it, then you don't have to do it. My biggest point is that if you have been working in your career and don't have a lot of hobbies, or maybe you just have a few things that you do, when you go from working full-time to being on vacation full-time, there is a transition period. And there's a great book called The New Retirement Mentality that you might want to read that kind of talks about that. But having something to keep your mind and body busy when you first retire really does lead to the most successful retirements. And like I said, the good news is you can try. If you don't like it, well, then you don't do it anymore. It's totally up to you. And you may even want to consider joining a few clubs or exploring activities of interest. Those are the things that you can be thinking about as you've arrived. Now, we've talked about the journey at different ages and what you've packed in your retirement suitcase. But the question is, did you pack the right things? Again, what does retirement look like for you? Are you ready for that? Do you have enough emergency funds? Have you set near-term goals? Have you set long-term goals? I have a number of clients that when they first retire, they take a major vacation trip. It might be overseas. It's probably a couple weeks. It's their near-term goal. It's a trip that they've always wanted to take and either didn't have the time or they didn't have the energy. But then there's also the long-term goals. Do they want to do that every year? Okay, well, did we pack enough in our suitcase to actually be able to do that? Or does it need to be every other year? Are you clear on the fixed expenses versus variable expenses in any of the large expenses? The number one thing that we see people do is leave out car purchases. If you are 55 years old, you're probably, if you're like me, you might need might need 3 or 4 new cars while you're in retirement. But a lot of people don't hold their cars for 10 years. They hold them for less than that. Those are expensive purchases and they need to be built into the plan. At least, even if you lease, like you've got the payment that you have to build in. So these are the things that you need to be making sure that you've packed the right items before you finally flip the switch, as we call it. Flipping the switch, I mentioned earlier, Barbara O'Neill wrote a book recently, last year, I guess it was published, called Flipping the Switch. And her book specifically talks about your guide to happiness and financial security in later life. She talks an awful lot about doing an encore career as well. Great book, very easy read. You can find it on Amazon. One of the things that we find interesting as financial planners when we talk to people is, their vision and realities, right? One of the things that can sometimes happen as you enter into retirement is that, especially if it's around 55, 65, you've got aging parents, and sometimes your retirement doesn't look exactly how you envisioned it because you slip into the role of a caregiver. Many times we talk to people about seeing different stages in retirement. So there's the early stage, the middle stage, and then the latter stage of retirement. Think about the 20-year journey that you just went through in your life, and most retirements are actually longer than that. If you look at the average life expectancy, and this is average life expectancies, those that have made it to age 65, a male typically lives to age 84 and a female to 86.7. Now, there has been some adjustments due to COVID last year. We actually saw for the first time average life expectancy decline. I think that's going to revert to the mean. So I put those life expectancies up there. But it's possible that the first 150-year-old has already been born. And think about if they retire at 65, how long they're actually going to be in retirement. So it's really important to think about that life expectancy. When people retire, often they think that they should also take their portfolio really conservative. But when I explain to people, and yes, it should be more conservative than it was when you were 45 or even when you were 40, but you may have 20 years in retirement and you don't want to underperform inflation when you're in retirement. So you don't want to go completely to cash once you get to those years. Living too long can be one of the negative impacts on your portfolio, but of course we want to plan for that particular occasion. You've heard me talk about the buckets. I've said the buckets several different times. There's the minimum income for security bucket, there's the surprise bucket, and there's the desired lifestyle bucket. Having a secure retirement means thinking of 3 buckets and how to use them, right? So this means that once your minimum security bucket is filled, because that's the first one that's got to be filled, that's minimum security, then you'll want to create a bucket of money that can be used for funding those one-time type surprises that kind of come up. The roof needs to be replaced. I suppose that's not really a surprise, but you could have a tree land on your roof or something and you need to replace it and the insurance doesn't cover it all. And then the final bucket that you fill is your desired lifestyle bucket. This is for vacations, gifts, hobbies, charity. Basically use it for anything above and beyond the minimum income and the surprise bucket. This is what makes retirement fun for a lot of people. This is how they want to live. This is the vision that you may have had in your head when I asked you to take a moment and think about it. It also means that if there's a tough year, that those expenses particularly could be reduced if there was a need to do that. The thing that I want you to understand is that when you're in retirement, you'll be pulling from this minimum retirement bucket. That is the bucket that you'll constantly be pulling from. We filled that bucket up with those investments and with that pension income or that Social Security income. That's part that goes into that minimum income security bucket. But you're constantly going to be pulling from that. If things are running smoothly, then you're going to skip over the surprise bucket and you're going to be pulling from the desired lifestyle bucket. Knowing that you have the surprise bucket to fund anything that might be a surprise, you can continue to have that desired lifestyle bucket. Again, by having a bucket that can adjust up and down based on the anticipation and unanticipated events, along with surprise bucket, you can really be confident in having a secure lifestyle. You know that your minimum income for security is there for you, and the rest can be variable. Sometimes insurance also plays a role in this and can be combined with the surprise bucket to protect your retirement. If you're over 45 but younger than 65, you may want to consider life insurance during that period of time, because if you lose your spouse's income or significant other's income, that can affect your ability to save into the minimum income security bucket. You may also want to talk about having a hybrid long-term care policy in that bucket. So knowing how those surprises and those roadblocks can affect your minimum income security bucket is something that you can sort of plan for in a way. Hope that it never happens, but as they say, plan for the worst and hope for the best. If you're over 65, then that's where we can talk about, some strategies for those events to happen if you even need some of that. So sometimes we talk about income replacement and making sure if one of you has a larger pension or doesn't have a pension or has a larger retirement bucket or desired lifestyle bucket than the other, then we can talk about how do we make sure that things are protected. Forecasting is another big part of planning for any kind of retirement, forecasting for those unknowns. And I'm about to dig in to a lot of information that's on this slide. But the question is, when you're on vacation, what do you need to plan for? One of the things that we tell all of our clients to do when they go on vacation is to have some place on a secure cloud drive documents that they can get to if they need to in the case of an emergency. That is one of the most important things that you can do to have your healthcare proxy, have a copy of your insurance card, have a copy of you probably have a driver's license with you, but have those documents somewhere where you can securely access them on a cloud so you don't take them with you, but have access to them. In addition to that, we want to look at things like, well, what will your health care and health insurance be in retirement? And will you be subject to what's called IRMA, which is an income adjustment to your Medicare premium? If you earn a certain amount or more, depending on whether you're single or whether you're a couple, you may be subject to additional premiums above and beyond the Medicare premiums that are standard. So again, remember when I was talking about the withdrawal planning that needs to take into place? This is a big piece of it. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but many times with proper planning, we can at least get it to a minimum. I've already talked about care planning, making sure that it's clear what kind of care you want, what kind of place you want to live. Do you want to live at home? Do you want to live in an independent living facility? Are you the type of person that wants interaction with other people sometimes, but wants to be removed at other times? What do you envision care planning look like? Plan for taxes. This is in so many different ways. Money, people think, oh, I can live off of XYZ dollars, but they don't take into consideration the tax hit that they also have to pull from their portfolio. So if you are taking if you're taking enough that your income is taxed at the 22% tax bracket, if you want a certain amount, you have to gross it up 22% to make sure that you're covering the taxes. So making sure that the way that you take your income is planned out so that you're minimizing your tax brackets in retirement. Also understand the financial impact of parents, kids, and grandkids. Are they going to expect you, or are you going to need to help them in any way, shape, or form? And are we forecasting properly and including in the plan those kinds of events in your life? I mentioned before rates of return. 1% rate of return can make a big difference in your plan. I just ran a plan the other day showing the difference between a 5.9% rate of return and a 5.09% rate of return. And the difference over the 20-year span that we ran that was over $200,000. And that wasn't even a full rate of return. So talking about the rate of return you need and the risk that you need to take is really super important also. Reviewing all your resources that are available to you and making sure everything comes to you in a way that you can utilize them and maximize them. Make sure that you also understand what if you are married, you have a significant other, what the cost of death is, and if there's any inheritance coming in. Unfortunately, we recently lost one of our clients, and when they were making the final arrangements, which she had very clearly laid out, which I was so proud of her, they were shocked at the price of cremation. They thought that because it was cremation, that it would be a lot less expensive. And I'm sure it was, and compared to having the full onset, but it was still $6,800. The other thing that you want to be conscientious of in forecasting in retirement is new technology. This is a great way to make sure that you stay current on things. Self-driving cars may be coming out, 3D printers might be coming out, but gosh, this past year, it was super important that people understood how to use technology to even see their families. FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Meets, those were all technologies that went absolutely crazy because that was the only way that we could see each other. And if you are able to take a class here and there to keep up on that technology, that will help and keep you informed throughout your retirement, help keep you savvy in that particular environment. Make sure that you plan and forecast for increased lifestyle costs, inflation, and changes in life expectancy as well. Those are the forecasting items that you need to be thinking about as you get into planning for your journey and attending the longest vacation of your life. Any questions? I didn't see anything in the chat box pop up.
Yes, Glenn Kennedy. I have a question I hope is general enough that may be of interest to the group at some point. My wife and I have quite recently retired, and we have actually made it a point during our entire working life to try to live on one person's income, and sometimes hers has been greater than mine, and sometimes it's the other way around. But anyway, the bottom line is that at the moment, we're not, I wouldn't say flush with cash, but we have adequate resources to meet our expected needs and so forth. My question deals with, I have a small annuity, and it was all pre-tax annuity, so the whole thing would be taxable. And I'm wondering because we're past the age now where you have to begin making those required minimum distributions, which of course it's spaced out so that if you live long enough, it'll be basically gone when you're gone.
116. Yeah, the tables go to 116.
Okay, well, I may not make it that long, but just wondering in general if there's any guidance you can give to me that would be relevant to others too. Some situation like that. Well, would there be any value in considering transferring all of that to, say, a Roth annuity at this point? Obviously, that would make, I presume, the bulk of what was in there now taxable now, but then it would preserve, if we don't need it for immediate needs, the balance for as long as we needed it, perhaps even for inheritance for our kids or something.
Yeah,
Does that
I
make
mean,
any sense?
it's certainly something to consider. The things that I would think about if I was looking at that from if I was sitting across the desk from you, I guess, for a real desk anymore, I would say, well, what would be the time frame that it would take to recover the taxes that you would pay on the conversion? So if in the example that I like, let's say you're in the 24% tax bracket. So, you know, you take 24% taxes, which you can pay with after-tax money if you wanted. You wouldn't have to have it withheld. You just have to know that you're going to have to pay it when tax time rolls around. Let's say it's, I don't know if you can see my screen right now with the calculator, but let's say it's $50,000 and you convert that. So it's going to cost you $12,000 in taxes this year if you're in the 24% tax bracket. Well, what rate of return would you need in order to recover that tax? So what's the break-even period? If you were earning if you were earning 6% on that money, so doing simple math again, it's going to take you about 4 years, little less, to recover from that tax hit that you took. Well, after 4 years, now you've made up the return. With the return, you've made up for the taxes that you paid. And if you never need this money, it continues to grow tax-free for the rest of your life. The benefit to your beneficiaries, and this goes to the statement that I made when I asked what's the risk capacity and for whom. If the plan is that it's not for you, that it's for your beneficiaries, then we might invest this particular account a little more aggressively anyway. And when you do pass, it will go on to your beneficiaries tax-free. Now, they are required to take it within 10 years. That's the new rule. But it's a Roth, so it doesn't really matter to them. It's not affecting their tax bracket or their tax situation. So I think if you're not going to need the money, like if you don't perceive that you're going to need the money, and depending on how your portfolio is allocated, you know, it could take you 4, it could take you 5 years, it could take you 6 to recover, but then anything over and above beyond that. But the timing of that, and it doesn't have to be all at once. Like sometimes we fill up the tax bucket, right? And one of the things that we're talking about this year is that we're kind of waiting to see what happens with policy change. So let's say that same annuity that you had was $50,000, but if you only took $20,000 this year, then that would cap out your tax bracket. Like that would be the top of your tax bracket. And you wouldn't pay as much tax on anything over that. Then we would fill up that bucket this year with that money and then turn around and do it again next year and fill up the bucket again. We would run the comparison, I should say, to see if it makes more sense to do that. But if policy changes, if tax law policy changes, we may change our mind and say, nope, do it all this year because tax rates are going up next year.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think it did. At least gave helpful guidance. So appreciate that.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. What's the oldest that you can be to contribute to the IRA?
As long as you have earned income, you can contribute to the IRA. So you could be 90 years old, and if you still had some kind of earned income, you could contribute to an IRA.
If you don't have earned income, can you contribute to any of those different?
The only one you could contribute to then would be the brokerage account. You've got to have some sort of W-2 income or self-employment income. Sometimes people will actually start a side gig, a part-time side gig, just to have enough money to contribute to one of those other buckets.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed the journey, the vacation journey of retirement. I understand there's another one tomorrow night on a retirement topic as well.
Mhm. So Amy, thank you. You do an incredible presentation. Your knowledge is so beneficial to people who participate. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, and Cooperative Extension thanks you. And I really, really appreciate you joining us for America Saves Week. I hope, and I'm sure everybody who attended will benefit from your knowledge. So
Great.
we're very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.